Comic Tom, how you doing?
Dude, I'm doing so good, man. We're talking about a sensitive subject on today's show, and I thought there's no better person to have than the master of mature comics. I wanted to read you something, Brian. This is 1998, the preview tour of Supernaturals.
That was fun.
Great time.
So much fun to do.
So in
Yeah,
your
great time is
intro,
right.
you said something that got me thinking this week, and I thought it just was fitting on this topic of censorship. We make comics for people who don't normally read comics. That's always part of our game. The comic industry is a pond. We're out to cause a ripple and turn the comic industry into an ocean. So you had been in the game for what, 5 years at that time?
That's right. Yeah,
Okay.
I was young and filled with piss and vinegar and out to shake it up. And you know what? I think we did.
You did. Well, at that time, you had won numerous awards. And would you not be offered a job at Marvel like soon after this?
It's true. It is a little known arcane topic, but during that time when companies like Event and Liefeld Studio, etc., under the tutelage of that particular leader for Marvel, I was actually offered and entertained the possibility of being the publisher of Marvel Comics. So I was actually wined and dined. This is true. I was actually wined and dined. I was brought out to Marvel. I was set up, and I think we vaguely, both sides, explored the possibility. But I knew I wasn't a fit. It's not. I wouldn't. I mean, I'm a fan, but I wouldn't work in that corporate environment that well. And I let them know that preemptively. I thought. I'm not going to name names, but there are people behind the scenes really advocating that I should publish for them. And there are people who are actually total players to this day. But I knew that I would feel trapped, and I wasn't a fit for them. They didn't know it yet, but I knew I wouldn't be a fit.
Constricting. Let's explore that if you don't mind.
Sure.
Because I imagine there are certain things that you can get away with when making comics and things you can't. And as it pertains to censorship, I'm curious, what's been your experience in this industry?
We have a peculiar industry because we all make a thing called comic books. And it's a strange name for what we do, because frequently there isn't anything funny about them. And I'm not speaking just for myself. I'm saying even superheroic fiction, etc. I think things like the graphic novel, it's a shame that just globally we hadn't picked up on using that word. So I think when people think of the word comic and book, it conjures up imagery of material for children. And I think this totally sticks to this day. The general public who are not as involved as we are, whether it be as like fans or professionals, they really think the default mechanism is that comic books are for children. Even the superheroic fiction that dominates cinema right now, I mean, that could be enjoyed by everybody, and I enjoy it as much as the next guy, but I think it calls to the notion of mass market and for children. So that being the baseline, anything that tends to deviate from that seems to get a reaction. So in my particular case, I mean, as recently as 10 days ago, we produced a book called Hell Witch the Forsaken, and we were at pre-press with a printing partner of ours, and they came along to a certain page 22, and it was a what I would call a carefully gloved sexual depiction. And I don't think it was X-rated or hardcore. However, the printer looked at it and said, look, we can't print this unless you alter it. Wow. And that was because one of their employees objected to the work. These guys have been our printing partner for a while, and they were happy to produce all the stuff that we do that has a lot of violence in it and cursing, but it was that depiction of sexual activity that got them. So it is interesting. And now here's the challenge in all this. The way I view free market capitalism, I declined to alter the material and chose to take my business elsewhere. And I didn't really vilify them because, strangely, I don't like to be censored, but by the same token, I completely understand their right to not want to print that material if their one employee in a company of 250 would object. We live in a weird culture where maybe they would get sued for otherwise producing this piece of material that some people consider objective. We recovered, we are printing somewhere else, and it is a challenge though. So like on the one hand, we're proud, like we're doing something that got banned to this day, and we have a history of doing that. I mean, Tom, in the 90s, we were doing a trading card set that portrayed Lucifer, the fictional character that represents the devil, and we had printers that wouldn't touch it just because of that particular depiction. So we're talking about upending literally a multi-million-dollar non-sport trading card project to another printer because of a singular depiction of Lucifer.
Wow, I can't imagine the amount of stress that goes into those types of business conversations when you're ready to take a product line to the community, especially this recent one. We're talking about this recent Kickstarter. We were just talking about this a week ago.
Yeah, we're here in November. We're talking like mid-November.
Wow.
Yeah, it just occurred.
So this is literally happening right now still in major publishing companies.
Well, it is. I mean, that's a challenge. Again, we have our particular view, which is part of the freedom of being who we are. Coffin Comics is we're going to produce our content and we can't bow.
Sure.
And by the way, I would assert that this phenomenon is acute here in the United States. We could do violence and cursing all day, but depictions of sexuality get challenging here domestically. But we could go to printing partners in Canada and actually in Asia, totally normal, and it's less sensitive for people.
Oh, wow.
It's just simply less sensitive.
Specifically here in the States, there's
That's
just a little bit more.
That's been my experience. So that's just this particular view. I can't speak to other people's, but that's been ours.
And for those who don't know, you've been producing mature comic books for over 25 years and
yes,
one of the leading independent publishers of comic books since the early 90s. So if you're experiencing it, then I'm sure this smaller press has experienced it as well.
I would imagine so, sure. Yeah. I mean, in fact, when we're kind of promoting that we got banned, and we're kind of, for a moment, we're all happy about it. And then we realize, okay, this is, okay, back to one.
Was there a moment? Was there even a moment in any of these times where you thought, oh, well, we'll just take that page to Photoshop and blur this just a little bit?
No.
Not one moment.
Can't do it, man. Yeah,
I
can't, because it's interesting because, it'd be much easier to do that. We could have even, like, the page has 3 panels on it, maybe make one panel bigger and stuff. But yeah, I guess I would be a sellout for what I do if I did it. So, and it was neat. I was actually on the phone with my representative and they said, we're taking a look at the material and we have found something that we consider objectionable on page 22. And if you would just blah, 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 blah. And I was like, I won't name a name, but I'll just say, Johnny, I'm going to have to ask you to stop speaking right now. And if what you're saying is you are recommending that I change my material to suit your needs, I can't do that. So I understand that we'll just have to agree to disagree on that. And we're going to move on. So before I was able to really edify that, I have to talk to our president, Francisco Pulido. I would just say, okay, look, you know what we're getting into by doing this, because now we're back to one. We were literally going to the press. So we actually we agreed company-wide and back to one. Okay, let's go find a printing partner and then make sure they don't object to this particular piece, which I would assert would be nothing crazier than you would see on the FX channel. Nothing that crazy. It's, right. It's interesting. I mean, the question of cursing and sexuality and mature reader content, comic books, I really look at the landscape and I'm just looking at how people pose on Instagram. I'm looking at cable content and it's nothing that we do you don't see there, to be honest with you.
Mm-hmm. It's and Lady Death isn't X-rated. It's tastefully done and has been for decades.
Well, the fascinating thing, thank you for that, Tom. And I think the fascinating thing about Lady Death is somehow, somewhere along the line, people decided it was mature. And I actually never thought we were all that mature, but given that we were having that label anyway, we were like, that's where we're going. All right, so more cursing, more sex, more violence. Let's have it, honestly.
Sure.
And then knowing, again, the landscape, I watched Game of Thrones and I'm like, what didn't happen on Game of Thrones? Incest, sex, violence, beheading, rape. It's crazy. So I don't even know that we go that far, but given the pop cultural landscape, but what I would say to you, you said, is there a moment where you're kind of thinking, maybe make the change? I think once we accepted our answer and we're moving on to the next printer, somewhere in there, I totally intellectually realized, you just made it harder on yourself, Pulido. But this has always been the answer. The answer is always no.
I love it. Well, do you think that in this type of environment with censorship in general, that would be difficult to cause these ripples as you described back in 1998, like the goal of getting new individuals into comic books? That's
always our goal to this day. And I mean, we could see it now empirically through crowdfunding. We can see when we attract people who have never crowdfunded a comic book before. Okay. So it's still always the goal. So I do think that we, in the domain of comic book entertainment, we're competing with everything that's happening. So our type of entertainment competes with everyone's, whatever they're doing in their day, other forms of entertainment. I think sometimes people get a little short-sighted thinking that comic book companies compete with each other. I mean, certainly they do for market share, but our competition is for people's attention, whether that is for the other types of entertainment they consume or just the stuff that's in their life every day, the ups and the downs, the changes. So that the premise of going out there and looking for the ripple, going to cause the ripple, it's kind of what we wake up and go after every day. But it's sort of like the carrot that's on the stick. It's always a little further out.
I'll close with this, Brian. Back in the early 90s, you caused a ripple with Lady Death and introducing this sword-wielding badass who fights evil in hell and earth. And
yes,
when you started taking Lady Death back to press a little bit more recently, right? In the last 5 years, is that correct?
February 4th will be our 5th anniversary of launching a new Lady Death story.
All of those stories from the 90s, retcon now. This new Lady Death line of comic books over those last 5 years, fresh stories, fresh take. Now for the first time on Indiegogo, available for everyone to jump into, is it not?
Yeah. Yes, sir. Absolutely. In fact, yeah, it's the 10 chapters of Lady Death, and we usually have them in what's called a square bound, perfect bound format of at least 48 pages, all the way up to 64. But yeah, in the last 5 years, we've had 10 chapters of Lady Death, and right now they're all available on Indiegogo under Lady Death, the collection.
I thought this would just be a great time to bring the Indiegogo to the community, because we've had you on a few times on the show, and I want to have all of the individuals who are interested in jumping on. One of the challenges in getting into comics sometimes is people don't know where to start. Yeah. And this is an easy place to start. I'm personally going with the hardcover. I'm going to get the 1 through 3 trade. I have the 1 through 3, but I don't have them in a hardcover bound. So I'm going to pick that perk up, and I recommend the community do so as well. We're going to put the link in the bio and introduce Lady Death to the comic book community who haven't met her yet. And her badass.
You need to meet her. You don't need to, but I cordially invite you to meet her.
Oh, I'll say you need to. I'll say you need to.
All right.
I appreciate it. Brian, until next time.
I've been Brian Pulido. Geek responsibly, and Comic Tom, assemble.
Assemble. I love it.